Due to the nature of this channel and the graphic content included, we do not shy away from certain people, circumstances, and, of course, deaths of those discussed on each episode. Today's episode focuses on one of the most evil, paranoid, and tyrannical figures to have ever walked the earth, Adolf Hitler. It goes without saying that the sheer mention of Hitler's name evokes a sense of anger, disgust, and frustration due to the atrocities, murders, and sense of entitlement associated with his outlook and desire for power during the Second World War. However, despite his horrifying and disgraceful actions, Adolf Hitler's rise and domination during his reign, as well as his death and legacy, are somewhat fascinating and worthy of investigation. Indeed, there are some who still consider the man to be a godlike figure, and so one must tread carefully when examining his state of mind and actions, especially during those final hours when the world was closing in on him. So, let us go back in time to the end of World War II and to the fall and death of Adolf Hitler. Before the war officially ended in September 1945, there was an earlier cause for celebration. News that, when filtered through the airwaves and newspapers of Allied countries, sparked a major sense of victory. A few months prior, during March and April, Adolf Hitler had locked himself away in his specially designed Führer bunker, situated under the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. His cowardice and awareness that his army was on the brink of defeat would overwhelm the once assured, tyrannical leader of the Nazi Party, as the Red Army were making large gains from the east. Hearing the news that Allied forces were taking back control on all fronts and that Russian forces were destroying all aspects of Nazi strongholds, Hitler's mindset quickly disintegrated into severe paranoia and madness. During those final weeks, surrounded by his loyal associates and family, Hitler detached himself from what was happening outside the walls of the bunker and instead focused on culminating his marriage to Eva Braun and sporadically spouting delusional political statements before eventually committing suicide along with his wife. Braun herself had previously attempted suicide on the 10th or 11th of August 1932 by shooting herself in the chest with her father's gun. Many believe that her intention was to make Hitler fall in love with her after they met some time earlier, and she became infatuated with him. The plan worked as Hitler became more attentive and committed to her as they became lovers. However, times were different now, and death was inevitable for the man Braun adored. It was just a matter of time, and by what means. With Soviet forces entering Berlin, Hitler attempted a final request for an armistice or peace deal in the hopes of splitting the Allied coalition. However, the Red Army were now on the banks of the Oder River and showed no signs of turning back. Not only was Hitler's depression and sense of dread all-consuming, those around him, including generals, aides and others, as well as those fighting on his behalf on the battlefield, were diminished to the point of surrender and acceptance of death. German civilians were now fleeing from their homes. For the first time, panic, confusion, death and despair had found its way into the heart of the so-called fatherland. After careful consideration and in a position of weakness and defeat, something not previously seen or associated with Hitler, he emerged from the bunker on April the 20th, 1945, to assess the destruction that had befell his country and capital city. He presented medals to members of the Hitler Youth Militia who'd been sent into battle as a means of desperation. Sending children to their deaths was something that Hitler had become accustomed to over the years. From the documents, photographs, and testimonies from those present at the time, Hitler appeared extremely frail. His left hand began shaking uncontrollably as he dished out the medals. It was evident that he was sick, as he appeared jaundiced, unsteady, and on the verge of collapsing. His madness would overspill in a much deliberated and hysterical rant at his generals, whom he blamed for betraying him. This emotional breakdown occurred on April the 22nd, after reports emerged that a planned German counteroffensive to stall the advancement of Soviet forces had failed. After this defeat, Hitler finally accepted and announced to those present that the war was over and that they had lost. Knowing that surrender, arrest, and/or death was imminent, Hitler remained locked away in his bunker and became heavily reliant on large doses of amphetamine injections, as well as other drugs, in order to survive within the confines of his self-made prison. It is reported that his hands were shaking violently and constantly, and that he was difficult to understand when he spoke. This would most likely be due to the cocktail of drugs he was taking, something which is much deliberated. He ordered that the chancellery above be dynamited street by street to deny its use to the Soviet army. He then turned his attentions to marrying Eva Braun in a brief civil ceremony on April the 28th. The next day, Hitler got to work in dictating his final political testament and last will. The documents exposed and highlighted his mental fragility and delusional outlook on the world, as the manifesto was more like the ramblings of a paranoid madman. However, in his political will, Hitler talked about his government and who he wanted to take over after he died. He named Karl Donitz as the person who should become the leader of Germany and Joseph Goebbels as the head of the government. Hitler also stated in the testament that the war had been forced on him by international Jewry and Western leaders, and called out high officials like Goering as traitors while spewing hateful anti-Semitic rhetoric. Braun wrote a final letter to her best friend, detailing where she had hidden some of her jewellery, her sadness at living with Hitler in the bunker, and despair that Germany had now effectively lost the war. April the 30th, 1945 would mark Hitler's last full day alive. After hearing the news that his fellow fascist dictator Benito Mussolini had been captured and publicly executed, Hitler grew ever more terrified of being arrested himself and began to look for a way out. Hearing the sounds of explosions and artillery from Red Army advancements, Hitler sat down with his new wife and discussed their options. It was quickly agreed that capture by the enemy was off the table, and so they made a pact that they would end their lives together that afternoon. Those who resided in the bunker with Hitler became aware of his decision to kill himself and tried desperately to persuade him against it. However, their pleas would be dismissed as the alternative would be unbearable to the once powerful leader and his doting bride. As the afternoon wore on, Hitler and Eva began their farewells to those left in the bunker, such as staff members and aides, before they headed towards their private quarters around 3:30 p.m. According to Hitler's own wishes, SS guards were stationed nearby to eventually respond to their deaths, and it wasn't long before the sound of a gunshot was heard. It is reported that Hitler had shot himself while biting into a cyanide capsule, his preferred means of suicide. Eva Braun had also ingested the poisonous substance, and they both lay lifeless in the room, sitting together on a sofa. Joseph Goebbels assumed the chancellorship, as per Hitler's final will instruction, immediately, but he too would commit suicide along his wife and young children in the bunker within the next 24 hours. Not long after the bodies of Hitler and Braun were discovered, they were carried upstairs, with assistance from Hitler's driver, to a small garden just outside the door of the bunker's complex. Witnesses stated that Goebbels and Bormann had gathered outside, and beside their bodies, one of them poured petrol from a can over the bodies before heading back into the safety of the bunker. From there, one of the aides lit a petrol-soaked rag and threw it onto the bodies, resulting in an immediate burst of flames. Those standing beside the flames made the Nazi salute, the Hitler Gruß, and headed into the confines of the bunker as well. It is said that even in death, Hitler did not want his body to be captured or retrieved by the enemy. Thus, instructions were given to immediately burn their corpses as quickly as possible before the Allied forces arrived on their doorstep. In the end, once the flames were extinguished and the smoke had dissipated, the majority of Hitler and Braun's remains had turned to ash. It is also reported that one of the bunker guards had arrived late and subsequently described how he was shocked at the sight of his leader's body bursting into flames in front of him. The sight haunted him ever since and was a significant sign that the war was indeed lost. Whatever was left of the bodies amongst the ashes and dirt was quickly buried in a shallow tomb crater, according to Russian reports. The bodies were eventually exhumed by Soviet troops and taken to Magdeburg in East Germany, where Hitler's body was said to have been finally destroyed in April 1970 by the KGB. Two fragments of the body A jawbone and skull were preserved and displayed in an exhibition at the Russian Federal Archives in Moscow in April 2000. Years later, in 1968, Soviet journalist Lev Bezymensky published his book, The Death of Adolf Hitler. In it, he discusses the forensic aspects of Hitler's demise in detail, releasing unseen photographs, dental details and transcripts from the initial examination, which was conducted by Faust Shukarovsky. It is stated in Bezymensky's book that Hitler died due to cyanide poisoning and that he had requested a coup de grace to ensure he died quickly. Unfortunately, the author would later reveal that his book included deliberate lies in order to boost sales and generate discussion with regards to the manner of Hitler's death. Historians such as Anton Jochimsthaler, who is well known for his extensive research into Adolf Hitler's life and death, reiterated comments that Bezymensky's report is ridiculous. Any one of my assistants would have done better. The whole thing is a farce. It is intolerably bad work. The transcript of the post-mortem section of 8th May 1945 describes anything but Hitler. American author and journalist James P. O'Donnell also claimed that cyanide, though it acts instantaneously, may not have been the sole cause of Hitler's death. He stated that the dictator could have ingested the poison and still have enough time to take the gun and shoot himself. As the news of Hitler's downfall and demise began to spread across Allied nations, thus ending the Second World War in Europe, celebrations rang out across the globe, with street parties and other jubilant galas taking place. However, it wouldn't take long before the occupying Allies divided Germany into 4 zones, an event that would ultimately be the catalyst of the Cold War between the Western Bloc, supported by the United States and the Soviet Union's Eastern Bloc. Future US President John F. Kennedy wrote in his diary that Hitler had a mystery about him in the way he lived and in the manner of his death that will live and grow after him, whilst historian Joachim Fest stated that the mystery surrounding the dictator's death meant that his image would remain in the public conversation. As expected, it didn't take long before conspiracy theorists began to claim that Adolf Hitler was actually alive and hiding out in various countries. These claims stemmed from Soviet disinformation and have only grown more bizarre and speculative as time went on. Such conspiracies have sparked debates on drug use within the Nazi Party, as well as alien contacts, ventures to Antarctica, and certain members dabbling in the occult. Television shows, books, podcasts, and movies have generated a lot of money and interest into Hitler's power, influence, and legacy. Films such as Hitler, The Rise of Evil 2003, starring Robert Carlyle, and Valkyrie 2008, starring Tom Cruise, portray Hitler's rise to dominance and the plots against him by those who wanted him dead. Perhaps the best portrayal of Hitler's final days in the Berlin bunker is that of Oliver Hirschbiegel's 2004 film Der Untergang, Downfall, starring Bruno Ganz in a career-defining performance. The film's realistic imagery, direction, and acting perfectly portrays Hitler's descent into madness and eventual death. And so we have come to the end of today's episode, folks. We hope that this shines a light and provides a better understanding into Hitler's last days. It is often hard to separate the man from the monster when discussing Adolf Hitler. No one can deny that his rise to power and unspeakable actions during the Second World War are unforgivable and deplorable, to say the least. When dealing with such a complex character, it is sometimes worth taking a step back to attempt an understanding of what led him to do what he did. The same goes for his downfall and death. We hope this episode delivered on this topic. Take care and look out for our next episode here on The Last 24.